Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back. My condolences to those of you who couldn't join us in Geneva for the phenomenal lunch that we all just had, but I hope that those of you tuning in virtually were able to eat something good in the break nevertheless. My name is Holland Michel. I'm an associate researcher in the Security and Technology program here at UNIDIR, and it is my great pleasure to be moderating this next panel this afternoon on counter-deepfake technologies. Now, the morning session really did a phenomenal job of scaring us to death about all of the threats that are out there, about the enemy at the gate, if you will, of deepfake technology. But now my hope is that we can turn to some of the good news and to take a look inside the rapidly expanding toolkit of technologies that are available to, if you will, fight back. And for that, I am very pleased to say that we have two of the sharpest tools available today joining us, both virtually, to walk us through the kinds of techniques that are available for countering the deepfake threat. First, we have Laura Ellis, who is the head of technology forecasting at the BBC, and Giorgio Patrini, who is the co-founder and CEO of Sensity. To give you a quick run of show, each of our two esteemed panelists will be delivering a short, tight presentation. And then we're gonna start hearing from you, the audience. Just to remind you to please submit your questions via the Slido app. We're gonna leave plenty of time for you to ask whatever you'd like to our esteemed panelists. So with that all being said, I would like to hand it over to Laura to kick us off. Hi, Laura.
Hello, thank you so much for having us. I'm very sorry too that I can't be with you today. It would have been lovely to be there in person, but you joined me in Surrey, just south of London, on my balcony. And I'm very delighted to be here with you and also to share the conversation, which I very much look forward to picking up as this session goes on. So as Arthur says, I'm head of technology forecasting for the BBC, and I work in BBC research and development currently. I'm going to tell you a little bit about something called Project Origin, which is one of our responses in BBC technology to the threat of deepfakes and misinformation and disinformation more generally. The way I'm going to do that is just to run through a few slides and just talk a little bit about the journey that we've been on since we started this work a couple of years ago. So the first thing I'm going to do is to try and move this on to the next slide. Good. Having a few problems with the onward button there. So how this began was, as I say, a couple of years ago, we started to think about where we might intervene most effectively in the disinformation space when it came to tackling the growing threat of fake news. So Origin came about because we knew that disinformation was starting to be rife. It was starting to be a huge problem. It's almost hard to think back now to those days when it seemed like almost an edge case in some of the work that we were doing. It seemed like something we probably needed to take account of, but it's since become much more front and central to our thinking. And the reason for that was really that the modern ecosystem that we found ourselves living in, particularly with social media, not placing any blame here, this is just a fact of life, it's much easier than it used to be to lose control of our content and our branding and to find things in that ecosystem which perhaps posed as us, posed as our organizations, and were perhaps unhelpful contextualizations or miscontextualizations of our work, or indeed wholly synthetic or wholly created stories, narratives, pieces of video and audio. So we felt that establishing media provenance could help us to secure the trust that we want people to have in our media and our media objects. And this really came about initially through a very interesting conference that we put together at the BBC with the help of the Partnership on AI, Facebook and the organisation Witness. We got our heads together and decided that one of the main things about the disinformation issue is that we need to work collaboratively on it. Nobody can come up with a solution on their own. And I've been enormously heartened at the collaboration that I've seen in this space really since those early days. So we got our heads together and we really considered that there were probably 4 areas into which we could intervene. And I know you're going to be hearing from Giorgio very, very shortly about the deepfakes area, where we know there is a lot of expertise, and it's very deep expertise and it's very specific. And we felt that we wanted to work with people on that, but that we didn't in our organisation have the expertise or the capacity to deal with deepfakes specifically as an issue. We looked at newsroom collaboration and decided that that was something we probably could do some work on. We looked at media literacy, and likewise, we've been doing some work in that area. But then we drilled into media provenance itself. So looking at the provenance of a piece of media, and we thought this was somewhere that we could work with other partners. And you saw those partners on the front page of my slide. So CBC, Radio Canada, Microsoft, and the New York Times were the initial partners that started this work with us. So what do we mean by provenance? This is from something called the C2PA, which I'll refer to again in a second, but basically it is the trustworthy facts about the origins of a piece of digital content. So we're looking at image, we're looking at video, we're looking at audio, we're also looking at documents, but we can come on to how that's a slightly more complex field later on. So it may include information such as who created it and how, when it was created, and so on. So that's the sort of space that we're looking at. And it's very important because the taxonomy in this field tends to vary a little bit. So we want to always be really clear about what it is that we're discussing. So our early work included a paper for IBC, which we put out in September 2020, which had a proof of concept and a scoping of the technology challenge, which is what I want to drill into a little bit more now. I also just wanted to talk about the timeline, which will also give us a sense of who else is involved in this space. So the workshop I described to you was back in May 2019, feels like a very long time ago now. We formed Origin off the back of that, just as a project with those 4 participants in around that September. A little bit later, or almost around the same time, something called the Content Authenticity Initiative was formed, which was an organisation looking at a very similar problem space, but taking that problem space from an earlier point in production. So we were looking with Origin Media Publishing. The CAI, interestingly, were looking at the point of acquisition. So they were looking at where media was acquired through a device. We felt that it was probably important to work together because one of the key things we'd identified was that standards in this space were going to be very key, open standards to its success. And off the back of that, we formed an organisation called the C2PA, which was formed in 2021. It's the Coalition for Content, Provenance and Authenticity, to a mouthful. We've been delighted since then to see our work increasingly drawing interest. We've had many people joining the C2PA. I can give you details if you're interested in how you might do that, if you wanted to do that. And we saw recently, as recently as this year, that the US government has started a bipartisan piece of work on a particular piece of work around looking at media provenance. So we're now into where we are this month. We're at this conference, delighted to be here. And I'm sorry if you can hear a little bit of drilling in the background. It's the disbenefits of being outside. The next piece of work we have on our slate is to operationalise within the BBC some of the things that the C2PA will be launching very shortly as their kind of first piece of work looking at what those standards might look like. So on to the technology challenge. We know that processing material can remove metadata from it, and we need to find solutions that maintain integrity right through the publication process. So going back into the mists of time, we know that watermarking and fingerprinting are technologies that we've used and that many of our colleagues in the media industry have used for years. But we also know that the process of creating these signals really needs to be easily embedded in workflows. That's another thing we've learned. So making this as frictionless a process as possible for journalists is also key. Another of our challenges is helping consumers to understand how to use provenance for them to make decisions. So again, there's some fantastic work going on with the Partnership on AI, amongst others, around how once we have identified signals that we want to pass on to our consumers about a piece of content they are consuming, how we phrase that, how we frame it, and how we help them to understand the work we have done and how that should be seen. This is the overarching approach for tamper-proof media, as you might call it. We take metadata, for example, the location where a photograph was taken, and we wrap it in a digitally signed manifest with the piece of content. And this can be embedded in the file that we've then created as a package, or it can be stored remotely to be reunited when the media is being consumed. I'll explain that in a little bit more detail as we go on. So the provenance of an item can be authenticated by a cryptographic hash. And this is a digital fingerprint, which is different for each file that we have. And editing that file will change that fingerprint, and it will prove that it's been altered. And since the fingerprint is stored in the image, the video, the audio file, whatever that file is, might cover mixed reality content, that then gives us a package of content which we can use to help authenticate the particular piece of media content that we have in mind. And the package is signed with the identification of the source. So if that source is the BBC is certified as that source so that nobody can pose as being the BBC. So the whole provenance chain is vouchsafed from the point of creation to the point of consumption. Readers or machines are then able to check the certificates or hashes and confirm the source and confirm that the content hasn't been altered. And this may be via browser extension or video players and device. It's important, though, that this works for all kinds of users across the globe. And one of the big pieces of feedback, which I'm sure that many of you in the room will really sympathise with, is that a lot of the ways that we try to tackle disinformation are at the moment complicated and often do not help local broadcasters, for example, or broadcasters from parts of the world where funding is not as readily available to research this. And we want to make sure that what we do is accessible, is frictionless, and is applicable for anybody who's using this kind of technology. I thought I'd do a diagram of the process just to kind of underpin what I've just been saying. So we acquire the media, we take the metadata and we bind it to the content and then sign that package. At the other end of that, the reader or machine is checking that provenance either via an embedded manifest, which is what we've described, or if that manifest is missing for whatever reason, not accessible, potentially via remote and online services. And it's this kind of technology that the CTPA is currently working on devising the standards and the basic ground rules for. And that work will be published very shortly. Here's another quote from the CTPA, which I think is a really important element of this work, which is about the content author having control. So again, just turning to our colleagues at Witness, one of the conversations we had was about the fact that in some regimes, it is very difficult to be identified as the author or provider of a piece of content for all the reasons that will become, that are completely obvious. So it is very important to us that this is optional, that there is control given to publishers of content, authors of content, providers of content, and that also we make it very clear as we communicate this work that just because a piece of content doesn't have signals in it or the full signals in it, that doesn't mean to say it's not a trustworthy piece of content. It just means to say that we might not have been able to embody those signals for a good reason. So to summarise, it's important just to flag up that this is about a process of trust in technology. It's not about truth of the journalism. It's easy to, when we look at the disinformation field, to say that it's all about, fact-checking or providing a source of ground truth. This is not what Origin and the CTPA work is here to do. It is here to vouchsafe that something has come from where it says it's come from and it has not been manipulated en route. What we're not doing is making any assertion about the trustworthiness relatively of the organisation, of the journalist, even of the content, the piece of content. So it's important just to make that distinction. This is really a technical standard. It's about where the content has come from. It's not about the content of that content, if you see what I mean. I've mentioned the global standards and how important we think those are in making sure that when we go on this journey and we start to see provenance being a signal which is used in the fight against disinformation, that it is available to everybody. And our overarching aim is to make the internet a safer place for our content, which is so important to us as media publishers, and to ourselves as consumers. That's all I have in terms of presentation, but we'll move on to questions later, I think, but I'm going to leave you with a slide which just gives you my contact details and also the URL for the Origin project website in case that's useful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Laura, for a rich and fascinating presentation. My heart rate has already slowed down significantly since this morning, and here to follow up on that with a different approach to, in many ways, the same problem. We have Giorgio. Giorgio, the floor is yours. If you can hear us and we can hear you, take it away.
for the introduction, and I'm very glad to be here today at this amazing event. My name is Giorgio Patrini. I'm one of the founder of Sensity, where I also lead research and development. Sensity is a journey that we started 3 years ago with the intent of really work at the intersection between AI, generative media, and security, with a main focus on creating technology and product that can be used by organizations to defend themselves against security threats related to deepfakes and other type of generative technologies. So I think this panel, I'm very grateful to be here today because I think this panel is really, our cup of tea. I'm glad to be joining Laura on this conversation today. We are going to take a very different approach and discussion here today from what we heard before about prominence. Our approach is in a way security or cybersecurity based, and it's based on 3 pillars that really lead our activity and my team activities. So we're going to be talking about threat intelligence, then the tools about detection and forensics and what they can give us. And then something that I'm very excited to talk about today, probably one of the first event really we'll publicly talk about some of these updates from internally from our team is red teaming. What can we do for finding new vulnerabilities with the deepfakes tools? So I'm going to get started with threat intelligence. The justification of why we do this, I think it's probably already quite in your head since this was mentioned already a few times in the discussions this morning. When we have a problem of security or somebody doing bad things with tool attacking us, we want to know who they are. We want to know where they hang out, what is their skills, what is their toolkit, what is their motivation, their modus operandi. Why? Because we would like to prevent them, or at least to be informed about what's happening so that we can up their defenses. So that's kind of one of the foundation for cybersecurity approach. This is something that we really started from the very beginning with Sensity. Over the years, things have changed, but we're really seeing an effect of what we may call commodification of deepfakes. So we have seen over years more and more communities around the world in many languages to open source code for creating deepfakes. They could be face swap, lip syncing, voice cloning, generation of fake images of many sorts. In a way that is completely open and open also to newcomers to learn how to do things at many levels. So perhaps even for not a super much experienced programmers, essentially what we can see today is a place, is an area where somebody coming in and wanted to learn just having some skills on Python scripting and maybe a desktop with a GPU at home. That's essentially what you need to start to generate the deepfakes and put them online. And there is community and forums and tutorial provided by collaborators and other developers around the world. Why this is actually happening? It's not just an amateur project. They are definitely, but there's also some business related to it. In a way, the growth of this area can be really justified also by the fact that there is monetization involved. There's been communities that support businesses for creating deepfake as a software as a service, where you will pay by usage to create your own things, or maybe marketplaces and a chance to actually find somebody that may create something customized for you at a price. And perhaps sometimes we also see people hiring some of these figures to improve technology. So this is actually a skill in demand in some underground places of the internet that you could find. So this gives you an idea maybe of what's behind the creation, but can we give like numbers? That's something that we asked ourselves already a few years ago, and we started to track and I think kind of a sense of the internet for what we deem as potentially problematic, potentially adversarially created deepfake around the world. So this is something that I think was also cited this morning as some of the statistics. We were kind of the first organization looking into numbers, hard data at the very beginning in 2018. And still today, we are collecting these through our technology. And it kind of paints a gloomy picture where we see every 6 months actually an exponential growth in doubling the number of deepfakes video that we may categorize as such online. They may threat some individuals, or maybe they already use it to attack some individuals. Well, what about the content? What are we really talking about? This is tens of thousands of videos, of course. So the question is, what is in these videos and who is in these videos in particular? From the point of view of this conference, I think we can kind of frame this as a sort of a reputation attack type of video, with the large majority of videos that we would see already a couple of years ago, and still more and more, is actually related to adult material being changed with the faces of public figures in many ways. Though I think so far maybe the focus of a lot of the conversation, also publicly speaking, has been on how deepfake may have been used or are used for disinformation. I think if you look at the larger scale of the problem, that's actually a minority, while personal attack, reputation attack to celebrities that are not necessarily politicians or business owners of sorts, but more people that are just very much present in the media, like entertainment or in the fashion industry. So that's all. That's actually what we see. Geographically speaking, we can also attach, in a way, the face and the name of a person that is publicly relevant to a nationality. And you will see that the West, with some European countries and the United States, and in particular also some cases in Asian countries, are the vast majority of victims unconsensually put into deepfake videos that will be published online. So this is about public figures, but also a question that we get asked a lot, and it's also very important to answer to, is what about private individual? May we be attacked ourselves, or our friends, our family as well, or are we already? So to answer that, I'm going to bring up some content from a publication out of an investigation of my team that we published at the end of last year, where we focus on studying for several months communities over group chat over Telegram, where we found that some skilled developers were able to embed a deepfake bot into chat rooms with the intent of nudifying photos of anybody that the user would essentially submit. This has shown actually how to, if you want, again, from a security point of view, enlarge the attack surface that deepfakes actually have when they are performed as an attack. Because now, since in particular this bot was able to operate on still picture instead of videos, now we have moved what can be done with deepfake technology and who can be attacked. And the reason is actually quite simple if you think about it. Public figures have a lot of material out there of them, so it's actually it's relatively easier to create the deepfakes of them. They are much more exposed than maybe a friend of mine that is not very much on social media, but perhaps has one picture on social media, and that alone could be used and be enough to actually perform this attack. And unfortunately, in this case, out of this investigation, we found that more than 100,000 private individuals were attacked. We found some archive of the activities of this phenomenon, and also, in particular, again, this was related to a picture of women over social media, and unfortunately, as well, of cases of children. So this was also a factor of criminal behavior in this case. And that's one of the connections that we found with also this underground world and the use of deepfakes. But I want to move a little bit more like on the good news, or perhaps a little bit more on the side of how we get here and what are the tools that we use to get here. And this is related to detection. So we sort of use AI guessing stuff, if you want. So we build our own technology that can understand to some extent what happened to a video, what happened to a photo, where they're tampered with some other AI technology, or maybe fully synthesized with generative technologies. So last year, on this regard, we actually open up some of our tools to the public, as people could come to our website and send the videos of images that we want to analyze, and we will run a bunch of different tests that were relevant to understand what happened to that video. Was that generated by a specific face swap architecture? What was the confidence of that? Or maybe that picture of this face that we are seeing was actually fully generated by a model called GAN. Can we also say something else about what that model was, or anything that can give more information if you're running an investigation or you want to, let's say, give us some attribution to this particular piece of media. This is, by the way, also the same kind of tools that we use when we collaborate sometimes case by case with, for example, expert witnesses or law enforcement. But we also gave an opening to some of these tools for online users that particularly use that on material on social media. And indeed, actually, one of the let's say really success cases that we've got with some collaboration on the social media space is that faces. So we're actually able to detect very confidently and with very with very much speed and scalability faces that are actually used, fake faces that are used as a social media account profile. This is a problem. This is actually an issue that is growing very much. I would say it started maybe a couple of years ago, really started to kick off. That we now see over and over again over different social media and also dating websites, uses of fake faces to impersonating somebody that doesn't exist, or perhaps running a scam, or perhaps joining a network of disinformation campaign and being able to share a lot of messages with a convincing face who is nobody though. So this is one of the actually biggest in terms of scale of the problem, and perhaps also whether we can provide a solution is one of the biggest issue that is in place at the moment. And then same tools and in terms of forensic and detection capabilities, we've also applied in some high-profile cases that involved over the last couple of years investigation by reporters and by the media, where the story was very much similar in most cases, in the sense that there was a claim or a rumor spread over social media or other sources that some of the video showing a high politician of the country may have been lip sync with AI or maybe face swap with AI. So we usually assisted reporters to understand if that was actually the case or not on a case-by-case basis. And again, this is, I think, are not at the scale as other problems that we are seeing, that we already mentioned. Those are usually very rare occasions. But of course, the weight that they bring when they are out in the wild and the effect that they can have on a nation in terms of national security or democratic resilience or disinformation, those are much bigger, and therefore, of course, that's something really worth being aware and being able to work on with technology. So last topic I want to touch on is actually not less worrying or preoccupying, and something that I think we should be very much aware of. And that's also where we are directing a lot of our resources at the moment. And we may call it red teaming, again, from jargon from cybersecurity. What we mean by this is, well, we use tools that attackers may have, or maybe we also do better by building on top of those. So we want to use deepfakes against the systems that are actually deployed to understand what are the systemic vulnerabilities of some of the systems, so that we can work with other organizations to fix those vulnerabilities. And in particular, our focus here has been mainly recently on biometric systems. So the point is a lot of business these days is moving online for pandemics, but also pre-pandemics, mainly in financial services, insurance, telco, government as well. Companies are happy to onboard more customers, even just with an onboarding process that happens completely online. That opens new security issues on understanding who is in front of a camera. Are they trying to spoof? Are they trying to fraud in some way the system? Can we believe them? So what can we do about it? And what actually deepfakes? What is the role that deepfakes play in this context? So first of all, the tools. This is something that we have been working on internally. As I think you already saw some demonstration of deepfakes in real time today. That's maybe our own version, a small clip. We are able to do face swaps in real time over a webcam, injecting essentially a new images frame by frame over a webcam. This is, by the way, one of our engineers, and probably you don't know him, but this is not his real face. So as a somebody else face that we are just pretending to be that person in a way. And this works in real time. Maybe now you're actually questioning what you're seeing as my face on the other on the camera, but I promise that I didn't even attempt to do that live because you know, if something goes wrong, then I think the organizer are not going to be very happy. So I exclude that. That's myself. So how do we use this? Or actually, let's turn it away the table around. So how currently are identity verified online, or what are the checks that happen? So this is actually a spoof that my co-founder did. So this is a real demo of somebody, him using a fake password that has been photoshopped. Why a password? Because we want to verify that the person in a selfie is the same person as the password that they are showing. So it's a first step of verification. So now Francesco is taking a selfie, and the system is going to compare essentially face recognition if the face of the password and his face under the camera are the same. In this case, I can tell you this works because now we are going to move in the next step. And again, by the way, this is not Francesco's real face. This is also very rough for photoshopping if you want. It doesn't matter. We are still able to pass through the biometric system here. So first step is identity verification with a selfie. Deepfake is enough to impersonate somebody else if you also put the same face over a passport, for example. The second step that is a little bit trickier is called liveness. Liveness, well, it's about preventing some of the usual fraud attempt against biometric system. For example, you may be able to show a picture of somebody else over the camera, or maybe a phone with a photo of somebody else on the camera, or maybe having a mask on of somebody else. Well, with deepfakes, you can do something more sophisticated. It's still us. You just inject a different camera stream. And again, that's what Francesco did here. And the liveness detection, what he's also trying to do is seeing if this person moves, if you can follow instruction. But we can't do that because we are just overimposing a face of somebody else on ourselves, and we can play all of that live. Any kind of instruction are given to us. So again, here liveness is broken. With a deepfake in real time, we are also able to do this. So if those two steps are implemented as a part of online banking for onboarding a customer, we are essentially already 90% there to open a bank account with the name of somebody else that may exist or not. And then, you know, do whatever illegal you want with it, essentially. So this is a pretty dangerous vulnerability that we should really pay attention to. So in terms of numbers, and I'm about to close, we have attempted spoofing with you know, our white hat hacker approach. Several commercially deployed vendors. So those are not demos; those are actually things that are online and used by financial services, healthcare provider, government agencies for digital citizens' IDs. 90% of our tests actually were able to spoof liveness, and face matching for the tests that we did, actually 100%. That is known to be a broken technology with face recognition. So it is actually a quite gloomy, again, a quite worrying picture, but we are optimists in the sense that that's what it has to be done to start a conversation when we need to find vulnerabilities because we can before to fix them, right? And it's better if a security company find them and start to have this conversation with biometrics providers or their customers instead of those being exploited online without the knowledge of people that are actually defrauded. So I think this is the first step in the right direction, but there is a lot of work to do, and that's what we are going to have fun to do in the next years to go, I believe. I'm going to close here, and of course, I'm very happy to take questions. If anybody wants to also dig into a little bit more about into some of the statistics, some of the investigation that we did in the past, check out the reports that we published roughly every year on our website. I thank you for your attention. I'm very happy to have a chat now with Laura and anybody if you guys have questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Giorgio, for a truly fascinating presentation. We have some wonderful questions that have come in from our audience members, but I am going to abuse my moderator privilege and kick things off. The techniques that you have described to us in these two fantastic presentations are still rather sophisticated. And so my question to you is whether there are any, shall we say, DIY tools that are available to anybody to separate the wheat from the chaff, if you will, when they're looking at some piece of media. Say, for example, you're video chatting with someone who claims to be, I don't know, Leonardo DiCaprio, and maybe you have some doubts as to the veracity of that claim. Without any of these tools at your disposal, what are some simple tricks that you might be able to leverage to do just that? And if I could actually just build on that with a question that did come in from one of our audience members about this notion of digital certificates or digital fingerprinting. Does this project intend to lead to a place where any media, in order to be trusted, needs to have a digital fingerprint? And if it doesn't, then we simply can't trust it? Is it an all or nothing approach, or is there some kind of middle ground if we can't also rely on these DIY tools that I'll hope you enlighten us upon as well?
I may start on the first question, Laura, if you're okay. I'll definitely leave you the second one, which is your department. But it's a tricky question indeed. And I think it has already been raised as an issue, as a concern in the area on the availability of tools that are free to use for the public, that are not too complicated to understand the outcome of, so you can actually rely on them. I think if you look into social media, probably what anybody could try and to give a try is reverse image search or reverse image video search, which means you can compare actually if an image as that maybe is claimed to be connected with something newsworthy, something sensational that just came up, was maybe used before in the past, or maybe some version of it has been used before in the past, and therefore you can kind of exclude that it should be attached to something newsworthy today, maybe to spread the misinformation. So that is one that definitely will give you some confidence if you find a match. With respect to video calls, I think it's very difficult, to be honest, to say what could be in terms of tools or suggestion. I guess I would just go very DIY here. Face swap technology rely on many pieces, and some of them are not extremely robust. So if you are thinking, if you have the doubts that somebody may be face swap over a call with you, maybe you can ask them to pass your hands over their face, and you may find some weird artifact coming up. That may be a good experiment to try with some things that we've seen today.
Laura?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We've been looking for some years now at just spotting those things, those artifacts that might give you clues to the fact that, you know, this is not a real person that you're looking at. Yes, there's no doubt that this technology is becoming more sophisticated, but there are still clues that you can use. On the more technological front, I know that you heard earlier on in the conference from Ashish Jaiman, who we've been working with for many years from Microsoft, and they were testing a tool into which you could paste a video URL, and that would tell you, in much the same way that we've been describing around Origin, it would tell you whether a particular piece of video had been altered or had been manipulated. So there are tools out there that it's a very big ecosystem with new things available all the time. And I think what I hear from journalists a lot is there just one place we can go for this? You know, it's very complicated if we're working, you know, in a daily news environment, which is pressured to be looking and seeking out, you know, different tools. Obviously, some journalistic teams have specialists, the better funded ones, but I think we're all trying to seek the holy grail of very easy to use tools that people can just apply to whatever it is they're looking at, and it to give them some steer on that. On the certification front, we've been very careful to think about that issue, and it's a very good question. We very much don't want people to feel that as provenance signals develop as a thing, and I think they will, and I think in a few years we'll look back and see them as a fairly major tool in helping us to establish the trustworthiness of what we're consuming. But in the meantime, these things will enter into the market at different rates. And it would be very unfair if organisations that, again, could afford to or could adopt this very quickly were seen as better than organisations that were perhaps further back on that journey. So whereas we might have looked at a provenance signal that said something was either a green or a red in very simple binary terms, what we're very keen to do is to make sure that there's a sense of neutral provenance. So in other words, we're not making a judgment that something is either yes provenance or no, not trustworthy, but that there may be many reasons why something is not able to be have provenance signals attached to it. Because that certification process is something which I think people will adopt very gradually. So we're very keen to make sure we don't shift the world into making judgments between things that have a provenance signal and things that are therefore deemed untrustworthy. That would be quite wrong. Also for the reasons that I mentioned earlier on about the fact that for some very good reasons, provenance signals may not be applicable to some pieces of media.
Thank you so much to you both for those answers. I may in fact now make a point of starting any Zoom call I'm in with a request for all my interlocutors to wave their hands in front of their faces. I'd like to move on to some of the other phenomenal questions that we have from our audience members. And if I may, I'll just run through 2 or 3 and you can pick and choose from these as you wish. One interesting question came in as to whether there are techniques available for detecting not necessarily the origin of a piece of media, but the provenance of a deepfake. If you determine that a piece of media is fake, are there ways of knowing who is responsible for having created that fake? There was also a question about whether there are any technological solutions that could involve blockchaining or blockchain to generate trust in and certify pieces of media that we consume. And a similar question came in around the notion of secure digital identity. As I understand it, this has been a hot topic of secure digital identity and whether that has a role to play in this too. I'll leave it there for the panelists to pick up on any of those threads that they might want to for a couple of minutes.
Shall I start with this one, Giorgio? I'm going to hand to you for the deepfake, the deepfake expertise on this. But on the blockchain front, yes, blockchain is definitely a tool in our armory here. Funnily enough, when we first started these conversations, we kind of immediately looked at blockchain as a way of vouchsafing some of the packages of signals that we were talking about. Because it seemed very obvious. It seemed a very obvious conclusion. As we develop the standards, blockchain may or may not be a part of this. I think it probably will be, or distributed ledger technology generally. We've been looking at it quite carefully. We're also looking at a part of the ecosystem where perhaps you may not need to use it. So it's definitely in there as a contender. I don't think it's necessarily essential to every aspect of what we're doing, but I think we should expect to see it as part of this ecosystem. I think it just feels like it's too obvious a use case for it, given the substantial work that blockchain sort of does with other provenance issues. I'm going to hand to Giorgio for the question on the more detailed deepfake work, because I think that's a really interesting one and where he'll have much more expertise than me.
Mm-hmm. Sure, it's so it's a matter of attribution, right? So which essentially means, and I think that's where the question is coming from. So can we attribute a fake piece of media that already been verified, certified as perhaps a deepfake to someone as a physical person or maybe organization? I think we are quite far from that, even hypothetically with technology. There's been some attempt, and we have also worked on that quite widely over the years on giving attribution to the tools and the software that were used to produce a piece of media. And again, this is very different from the approach that Laura is championing about provenance. So we do it post hoc without knowing anything except the content, right? So it's much more difficult. And you could imagine having, again, a sort of a threat intelligence approach where you are able to map your attacker, your adversaries, and people that perhaps around the world, the organization that already proved to have the capabilities to pull off these kind of creations and maybe attacks with them. And you could imagine a way to kind of cross-match between technological capabilities from the historical perspective, from intelligence, and individuals and organizations. We had some work on that, but I think there is still a lot to go before this becomes, in a way, operational and reliable, also from the point of view of some fundamental research.
Thanks so much to you both. This next question gets a little into some of the nitty-gritty of certification. One of our audience members asks how realistic and effective it would be to have a certificate of authenticity literally implanted in the analyzed media. And if this would be issued by some kind of company, say, or independent body. And perhaps building on that, what is the likelihood or possibility of forgeries of these types of certificates? And if I may, here really abusing my privilege as moderator to take that even further, do you see any possibilities in the malicious use of the countermeasures themselves, i.e. faking a forensic tool in order to undermine a truly legitimate piece of media? Is this something that we should add to the list of things to worry about in this already rather worrying discussion that we've been having today?
So I think certainly in this world you become a conspiracy nut yourself, because you know that there are people out there who are going to pretty much do anything to spoof or to fake or to get material out there that they wish to have in the ecosystem. So it does make you. I'm hoping it's not making us paranoid, but you do have to assume bad intent, I'm afraid, I think. And we have to make sure that, and I was reading through some of the early discussions we were having with C2PA today, which I'm really looking forward to everybody being able to see shortly. And some of the thinking that encompasses is exactly that. It's about, what's the worst that could happen? Could we actually, by trying to make this good intervention, make things worse by allowing really bad content to somehow, acquire the status of certification? Certification is one of the really big issues around this. And if you imagine that C2PA is looking at the wider problem space, certification is something that the Origin team is specifically trying to address. And there are many ways we might go about this, and it's very much an ongoing debate. One of the things we're very adamant about is that whatever happens, it must be a very reliable and pretty much shatterproof form of allowing people who have bona fide media credentials to make sure that they are exhibited and that they cannot be spoofed. Because when we first started this, we came to the very quick conclusion that it would be quite easy if we didn't have that very good process in place for somebody just to claim, sitting in a basement in Finland or Kazakhstan, no offense to either of those countries, that that they were the BBC or they were the Croatian Broadcasting Organization. And of course, it's really important that doesn't happen. And I think the other thing just to say on this, and sorry, I think I'm taking too much time, but as we look at this whole issue, we've spent a lot of time looking at individual pieces of media and trying to debunk them and fact check them and say, this is wrong, this is a deep fake, this is not something that is what it appears to be. And I think where we need to push our attention now is to some of the themes. There was a fascinating article, wasn't there, around that there are 12 people, I think, behind most of the disinformation around vaccination on Facebook. And Facebook are doing some very interesting work around image similarity and ways of kind of like really delving into what we're now seeing as themes and chunks of disinformation rather than singular pieces, atomized pieces of content. So I think, again, the work will now start to focus much more on things like themes and trends and intent, as well as, is this a piece of disinformation? And if it is, why? And what makes it a piece of disinformation? So I think, that wider context would also help us in this work. as we move it forward.
I'll pick up on my side the question from about counter forensics. I guess we can define it. It is a real possibility. I don't think we are actually there at the moment, at least in the area of deepfakes. But the point being, once there is a system, even potentially perfect, to detect and filter out bad content, there is always the chance that a motivated enough attacker will be able to use it and reverse engineer it so that the next attack will be bypassing it. This is not new just for this area, right? So anytime that we are talking about adversaries, not just like in a digital space, but really anywhere, there is always going to be a dynamic of mutual improvement and evolution. It is particularly there is a factor though when we talk about deep neural network and generative media though, and that is how these large neural network models are trained. Sometimes are actually already trained to bypass some sort of filter for realism that works adversarial against it. How we generate a realistically looking image is actually trying to fool a detector of fake images already. So that kind of adversarial dynamic is already embedded into how this kind of technology work. And it is even easier than other spaces, like it could be, for example, malware detection. It is easier in our area using deep neural network to imagine that an attacker could use this kind of tools to create deep fakes that can evade detection. The good news is I think we still have a long time to get there. There is research work that has shown it is possible, but before seeing that in the wild, I think it's still going to take some time.
So that goes to what seems to be very much a running theme in the discussion around deepfakes, which is that in a sphere where there are very few certainties, one certainty that is guaranteed is that people will continue to try and make fake media and will continue to innovate upon the technology in ways that will challenge the countermeasures that exist and that will no doubt be developed in the future. Which leads me to a question that I would pose to both of you to wrap things up for us, if you will. And that is how you see the dynamic between the countermeasures and the threats of deepfakes evolving in the years ahead. Is this going to be a perpetual cat and mouse game, if you will, between the offense and the defense, or do you see some endpoint of stasis or equilibrium that we are striving for? You each have just a couple of minutes to tie us up. Why don't we start with Giorgio, and then we'll give the last word to Laura.
I would actually just invade maybe the topic that Laura may mention about. I think provenance and certification with cryptographically created keys and signature is a way to think about a sort of an ending point for a lot of use cases where we would just trust to have that system in place. The problem is what are all the other applications where that system of cryptographic keys cannot be part of the solution because of many reasons that I think are already been discussed actually today. I don't think there is going to be an ending point with this dynamic because as we haven't seen, say for example, an ending point on the industry of antiviruses, I don't think anybody would claim that in 5 years somebody would have a miracle technology and the problem is gone. There is always going to be incentive to create them, either politically or financially. I think we are just going to play a similar game, unfortunately. But just to end on a positive note, I think having this discussion and then making the public aware of the problem is the first step into preparing solutions. And also focusing on what are the problems today and tomorrow, not just talking about a hypothetical that may happen in 20 years, which of course is important to do, but maybe less relevant from the point of view of saving somebody lives from an attack or from a fraud today. Last thing, I think I just mentioned it on the presentation, but I think the big thing that we will see soon in terms of threat and real threat is going to be real-time deepfakes.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's some very terrifying new threats coming into this world for us. And I think if we look at it, I'm going to borrow an analogy very quickly from the world of vaccines, because we spend so much of our time there in the disinformation community, and just say that, you know, I think there will be new variants, there'll be new viruses, there'll be new diseases that come into this disinformation space. And I do see them as diseases, because it is such a horrible thing to be having to deal with. But we should take hope, I think, Arthur, from the fact that we have really good people who are our defenses. We've got good people who are being our antibodies and our T cells and our lymph glands, and sort of, you know, helping to tackle this pernicious thing that has happened to our media. And I have great faith in the world of disinformation tackling. There are fantastic people in it, like yourselves, like Giorgio, like the people that we work with from organisations such as Witness, from the social media platforms who are playing a big role in this, from the academics, right across to the media publisher environment. So I have great hope that, you know, we have an army. We can fight it. We can continue to fight it, and we will continue to face whatever new threats come along. So I'm going to take heart from that. And thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss this in such great company. Thank you.
Thank you both for ending us on a positive note. It is a very scary world out there, but I'm glad that we have the two of you on our side. With that being said, we've run out the clock. All that's left to do is for you all to join me in thanking our two phenomenal panelists, Laura and Giorgio. I think we are allowed to clap for them. And now I'll hand it over to Giacomo to continue this afternoon's proceedings. Thanks so much.
Thank you.